Faced with the decision to be an organ donor, a full 80% of the families who say no, they say no because, not because their loved one didn't want to be a donor, they say no because they didn't know what their loved one wanted. I'm here today representing Gift of Life. Gift of Life is a Kansas City-based organization. What we do is we bring awareness to the critical need of organ and tissue donation. But why would you ask me? Why would I be here for a United Way meeting? I don't have any affiliation with United Way or your campaign. They asked me here for one reason, to tell my story of why organ and tissue donation is so important, and how you, through United Way, through what you do, the decisions you make, can make a difference in the work that we do. Now, my first experience with transplantation came from my friend, Mike Gagan. Mike was diagnosed with a very serious, a very rare liver disease, and it was going to ultimately require a transplant. But Mike was very far down on the transplant list. However, his particular disease made him extremely susceptible to all forms of cancer. Now, I met Mike as he and I were financial advisors, and I met him as part of a coaching program. 22 of us, like us, from around the country, we all converged on New York City every 3 months for 2 years. And it was during that time that Mike told us about his worsening condition. And it was also during that time that I thought for the first time, what if I became a donor? A living liver donor. You see, it's a fascinating thing. Actually, I think almost miraculous. The liver is the only organ that actually regenerates itself. In fact, for you and I, our livers are in regeneration all the time. And what the surgeons actually do is from the donor, they would take up to 60% of his liver, and then they would transplant that into the recipient. And both parts would then grow to full adult size. Again, it seems miraculous. And actually at the time, it was a very rare surgery. They'd only done it a few dozen times around the world. They carried significant risk with it, but I saw it as an opportunity. An opportunity to help a friend. An opportunity to see his 3 young children get to know their dad. And an opportunity for me to live without regret. So I offered, and he turned me down. It was a few months later, though, that Mike found that none of his family members were compatible, and I got a phone call. And in that phone call, Mike was trying to find the right words to say. He was starting to stutter and stammer around, but I knew what he was going to ask me. And so to break the tension, I said, Mike, I have to tell you, I feel just a little bit like the homecoming queen, and you're getting ready to ask me for prom. And he said, yeah, that's it. And I said, how long did it take you to pick up the telephone? He said, I've done it off and on for the last 3 days. Let's stop wasting time. And so we started, but we had an obstacle. The obstacle was insurance. You see, insurance would actually cover the testing for 2 potential donors, and I was potential donor number 3. So before the hospital would begin, they needed $25,000 cash. Do you remember my coaching group, those 22 people? Once they heard what Mike and I were up to, they rallied. 10 days later, Mike opened up his mail and he had a check for $25,000. Now, let me tell you about one of my best days ever. One of my best days ever was I just finished 3 extensive and exhaustive days of testing. And I had one more obstacle to clear, and that was an angiogram. And an angiogram is where they actually inject dye into your system so they can get a full 360-degree view of your liver for transplantation. And going in, I asked the doctor, I said, Doc, what are we looking for? And he said, Andy, let me explain to you the textbook. He said, you won't look like the textbook because hardly anybody does, but this is what would be perfect for transplantation, is that if your liver was like this, we would actually have one large artery that came in from below and then forked into 2, and that way they could do the resection, and that would be best for transplantation. That's the textbook. And so we go in, we come out of the exam, and you know, you're excited, you're anxious. I said, so what'd you see? And instead of answering, he didn't look at me. And he crossed his arms and he was looking down, very thoughtful, and I was preparing for the worst. He finally looked up and he said to me slowly, he said, Andy, the textbook. You're the textbook. That was a good day. 3 weeks later, they assembled 8 surgeons to do this surgery, and I was first. 4 hours into my operation, they basically have you opened up and ready to do the resection. And Mike was going to be in the adjoining room where they take out his diseased liver. However, for his surgery, the doctors found a previously unseen tumor from a very rare cancer. And they knew at that time that the transplant would not be successful. Surgery, the operation lasted 13 hours. But Mike was going to fight, and he did. 6 months later, his best friend Ed called me. He said, "Andy, we haven't seen you since recovery. When are you coming?" And I said, "I've got tickets for Pennsylvania. I'm coming up in 3 weeks." He said, "Why don't you come now?" So I did, and 2 days later, I found myself at the kitchen table at Mike's house with Mike, his wife Karen, best friend Ed, and me. And we had an amazing evening. Late that night, Karen called, woke me up, and I took her and Mike to the hospital where he died. Back in Kansas City, I tried to find something positive from this experience. And what I found was Gift of Life. Gift of Life today has a program called Lifesavers. And what we do is we go into the high schools and we tell kids about organ donation. In fact, we're reaching 65 area high schools in the Kansas City area, 18,000 students and their families every single year. Because it's not just signing the back of this. The most important thing is to have the conversation with the people that you love and let them know what your wishes are. Saving lives through organ and tissue donation can only be done through the generosity of individuals and organizations like the United Way. Oh, do you remember the $25,000? That was reimbursed after the surgery. And you know, there's a lot of things you can do with $25,000. What Karen did is what she knew Mike would have wanted, and that money came from Pennsylvania, and it went to Kansas City, directly donated to the Gift of Life. And today, right now, is your opportunity to make a decision to make a difference. Because it's through you and through United Way that we make a better community and a better world to live in.